your business, the build buy dilemma, and a summary at the end by Dave DiMillo. Our speakers today are, as I mentioned a bit earlier, Dave DiMillo, who's the Solution Sales Director for our Software Monetization Group, Vickie White, Director of Virtual Products for Gemalto, and Manoj Tharakan, who is the Principal Solution Architect also for Software Monetization Group. So I think Dave is first up, and I'd like to turn this over to him in a minute. But first, let me ask you that if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to enter the questions in the chat box, and we'll be addressing them at the end of the seminar or the webinar. Thank you. Dave?
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Quick sound check. Excellent. So I only have 2 charts, so I'll be brief, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Vickie, who's going to get to most of the good stuff today. So when we think about the digital supply chain in terms of what that means with software monetization, I think the best way to think about it and look at it is through the eyes of our customers. And if I look at our customer base, especially over the last few years, the clear trend is hardware companies mostly, not all, but we certainly do have some pure play software companies that are working with us. But the clear trend is hardware companies that essentially need to figure out how to drive more value through software. As we're seeing more hardware becoming virtualized, more hardware becoming marginalized, these companies really have to embrace embrace the software. And if you embrace software, you better figure out how to monetize it, right? A great example, a perfect example is just a call that I finished with a customer that we just started working with in the UK. I was on this call this morning, and they make control systems for buildings. They like prison systems, prisons, the highly secure door access, and for hospitals and things like that. So they have to, work in those highly secure environments and understand exactly which doors have been opened, et cetera. So they are a traditional hardware company that gave away the software. And they're seeing, again, their competitors are selling more and more software, and the hardware is becoming more of a commodity. And the guy said to me today, this is our Kodak moment, or our Polaroid moment, right? If we can't figure out how to sell software, we are going out of business. Then it's a perfect example of why customers are talking to us and the types of challenges they have. If you take a look at this chart, generally when we engage, it's usually because of 2 things. On the left is these companies need to again, understand how to deliver software, how to monetize software, how to sell it differently, how to sell subscriptions, how to sell pay-per-use, and feature-based licensing or modular-based software offerings. And some of those concepts are new, and we'll talk about that in the next chart. As well as on the back office consolidation. Oh, go back one, Marcy, I'm sorry. I gave you a false lead. My fault. Yeah, and the other piece is with companies that have some sort of license enforcement, have grown over time, and they may have 4 or 5 different ways of licensing the software with license keys and so forth, and they want to consolidate all that, make it easier for their customers to do business with them, and then wrap the whole thing up into an automated system with a good customer experience. So what I'm getting at is the point of the slide is to say when we engage with companies, it's those who are trying to sell software differently, trying to monetize, trying to get modernize their business, and then take their legacy software offerings and monetization platform and modernize that into something that's slick, pretty good customer experience, make it easy for their customers to do business with them. Okay, and not all this stuff is easy. So if you go to the next chart, especially if you are a hardware company and you start to look at the digital supply chain, just taking a quick look around this chart, some of these things outside of ERP, everybody knows what that is, CRM, that's a known quantity. But for a hardware company, when you start looking at software entitlement management, that concept's new, as well as doing software warranties and SLAs, tracking usage data, delivering software electronically rather than on physical media or as part of a package application that comes with your hardware, etc. So again, the point here is that for a traditional IDV, a device manufacturer, some of these concepts and systems are new. It's a new style of thinking. It's a new way of working, and there's certainly quite a bit of a chasm to cross, as we say, right? So as a company, we cannot escape this ourselves, being a traditional hardware company ourselves. And so what I want to do is introduce Vickie White, who is our director of virtual products, meaning she's the one that is really engineering the digital supply chain for us. She can talk to some of the bruises and road bumps and speed bumps along the way, and hopefully you can relate to some of those challenges, and hopefully you'll find that she has some really valuable things to share.
Thanks, Dave. This is Vickie. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. As Dave mentioned, I also work with Gemalto. My position was created a little over a year ago. The position didn't exist before, but we're undergoing a similar transition to what many of you probably are, where, as Dave mentioned, historically we were more hardware centric with some software on the side, and now we're seeing a transition where it's software services as the main focus, and hardware kind of declining, not going away but declining. So I'm an internal customer that can talk through some real world examples of how we've been on a journey through this type of transition. And the format that I wanted to use was just to talk through 5 life cycles, 5 stages of a life cycle, and maybe touch on some of the critical things that we've found during each phase of the life cycle. And these will be, recommendations, best practices, and if there's time at the end to talk through actual examples in the Q&A session, you'll probably hear me say that, yeah, these things that we recommend, many of them we're doing well and we're navigating well. Some of them not so much, but we have those on our roadmap to do. So let's talk through each one. And the key point, though, is I want to recognize each of these as a separate phase or stage, but it's important to understand that there's interconnectivity underneath, particularly with systems, the people, and processes. They have to kind of weave together underneath. So the 5 stages that we'll talk through are build, followed by sell, fulfill, maintain, and renew. Let's go to the first one. Next slide, please. Okay, phase 1, the build stage. So what I found in the build stage, this is, pretty obvious, but it's worth restating. I think as we've undergone this transition, there was a perception internally that, hey, this is kind of an operational thing, and I actually report up through the operations organization. So there's an easy misconception that this is something that operations can solve on their own, and that's not the case. There needs to be a lot of cooperation up front in the build phase between product management, engineering, and operations to really get a solid common understanding of what the offer is going to look like. So, with product management, how are we going to price? What does the offer look like, right? So what are the features perhaps that we're going to sell? How are we going to deliver the product? All of those decisions need to be made up front such that engineering gets a clear instruction on how is the product going to be built, and then operations in turn can set up part numbers and bills of material and systems and so forth. If those conversations don't happen up front, then you definitely aren't going to be successful in the following stages. So the cooperation between those 3 functions, among others, really important. Another point I wanted to make here is just that we found that tracking everything, that the virtual deliverable, whether that be software, whatever. Software is the easiest example, but the virtual deliverable, whatever it is, tracking that in a single system, just like you would track, hardware items, is key. We need to track those types of things, have version controls, and make those deliverables available in a system where everyone can see them. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be version controlled and tracked. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to the sell stage. So the biggest lessons we've learned here is that we need to make sure that we're keeping the ordering process as simple and convenient for the customer as possible. So online ordering is something that we have offered in pockets of the business. We don't. This is an area where I think we can improve. We can have maybe a more consolidated online ordering portal. A lot of our business we do with customers today is still the traditional, purchase order issued to us and gets booked as a sales order in our system. But more and more, we're seeing customers who want to have the convenience of online ordering. So keeping it convenient and then error-free, right? So if your offer is super complicated and there's lots of combinations that that aren't allowed, and mixing and matching is not easy to navigate with some kind of a order configurator, there's likely going to be mistakes, which will then cause problems downstream. So we've found that using configuration tools, whether they be informal or a little bit more formalized in ERP systems, is key. And then the last thing I wanted to point out here is just interconnectivity of systems. So we, as well as other companies, may have many systems. We have an ERP system where we're capturing our revenue. We have CRM systems where we're capturing opportunities, and so on. Keeping those systems as connected as possible, such that the data is consistent between systems, has really helped us. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to fulfill. This is my favorite stage personally, having a bit of a fulfillment background. So the key points I wanted to outline here is that if you're delivering, let's say, software, to make sure to host that in a controlled way, in a controlled location, and in a single location where you can maybe point to it from various other delivery points, rather than an approach where I've seen us start out where we have a single deliverable, but we're maybe copying that to 3 or 4 different locations, and then there's the risk of those copies getting out of sync. So hosting a deliverable in a single location for consistency and pointing it, from multiple download points is best practice. Also, going back to the deliverable, so the practice of having, let's again use the software as an example, a software file that can behave differently depending on features that are licensed and paid for. So rather than having a special build that is delivered to customers for trials versus another software build that's more of a production build and having to manage those separately, we're trying to encourage our PLM teams and our engineering teams to build, where possible, one piece of software that we can deliver, and then we can basically deliver a feature via a license string so that features can be enabled or disabled. So again, trying to get some kind of simplicity such that the deliverable is simple, the initial deliverable is simple, and it can be used in different ways by various customers depending on their needs, just according to how it's licensed. Another point I wanted to talk about here is self-service. So delivering entitlements, creating an entitlement in an entitlement management system, having a customer accessible portal where we can basically just send them a reference or an entitlement and then allow them to log into that portal and self-serve in many ways. Register, activate, and even modify in some cases, transfer things in some cases. So that self-service movement has been a big one for us and very well received. So the themes here are that we want to make sure that we're delivering things quickly. I didn't mention that really in any of these examples, but the expectation of instantaneous delivery is kind of inherent in today's on-demand society. So, can we deliver quickly inexpensively, meaning we don't have people behind the scenes turning cranks, but we have systems talking and automation and making things convenient for customers to order. Those are the 3 focus points during fulfill stage for us. Next slide, please. Maintain. So with maintain, we have lots of things to consider. One is obviously support. So if customers are having problems, we have a case management system where they can go online, submit help desk tickets to our tech support team. And we didn't want to just put the system out there such that customers can, submit tickets. We actually had to put a lot of focus as well into training our tech support team with this new model. So the tech support team is very knowledgeable about the ticketing system, and they know how to interact with customers, but how to support customers who are buying different products and which products are maybe tracked in different entitlement management systems has been a change for them, for the tech support team. So we've had to put a lot of focus on training them how to look up, information that they didn't have to look up before, and how to support customers who, let's say, are having problems with logging into the activation portal and some of those self-service functions that I mentioned earlier. So support has been a big focus. Product notifications, so maintaining the right balance between, not spamming customers too much, but notifying them of important product updates via pushes or opt-in subscription by the customer. And also proactive notifications when there's an expiry date coming up, a license expiry or a subscription or so forth, not waiting, not putting the customer in a position to have to track that himself, but actually being proactive and pushing notifications to increase the chances that renewals will happen on time. And then finally, just because we have now the self-service capability, we have connectivity in many cases with the customer or their application to see that we can see when they're logging in, when they're activating, and how they're using our product. We're using that information either for billing in usage billing type models, or just for business intelligence for us and our product managers to see who's using our products, how often, and which features specifically they're using, and really taking that information and using it to decide where to target future investment. Next slide, please. The last one is a renewal stage. So I would say that while there is some focus on making renewing easy via notifications and alerts and so forth, we're actually trying to jump over that a bit into the next phase, which is, as much as possible, utilizing evergreen contracts. These types of contracts would be ones that have a fixed commitment period, let's say a 1 or 2 year contract, but they auto renew. So subscriptions, but that they don't have a end date where they'll expire right away, but written into the contract they will continue to renew until the customer decides to cancel. So that kind of eliminates the need for proactive notifications of expiration, or at least maybe there's just one at the end of the committed period. But really, we're trying to take those decision points from our customers away so that they don't really have to decide, well, do I want to renew or do I not? It just kind of happens. And if they're happy with the service, they're going to stay with us as a customer. And in cases where we are signing up new customers, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to opt in to sign up by using things like digital signing and click-through online contracts, rather than having to engage back and forth with paper contracts and legal departments. And finally, just the last bullet around business models. Although we do have several different models, pay-as-you-go or term licenses, we want to make sure that if a customer has come to us and maybe engaged in one business model, and then they decide that that's not the right business model for them any longer, try to make it easy for them to switch to a different business model. Next slide, please. Okay, so after covering those 5 stages, I want to just go over a list of best practices and recommendations. Next slide, please. All right, so pulling together a lot of what I've just said into a list of top 8 recommendations. Here they are, I'll just read through them quickly. First, utilize a single system to track your virtual components, not just hardware. Second, licensing integration. So integration between systems, especially your, product data management or lifecycle management system, where you're keeping, you're doing your version control of deliverables, and your ERP system, and then any other, content delivery system. So that interlinking of systems so that data cannot get out of sync is key. Number 3, software distribution. This is where we said centralize your software distribution system or source in one place so that you can have wide distribution, but you just are keeping one master copy. Configuration tools, utilize where possible product configuration tools, unless your offer is so simple that you don't need it. But in order to reduce errors up front, which would cause problems downstream, introduce tools that make it easy for customers to order in an error-free fashion. Number 5, customized portals. This is the customer-facing portal. Wherever you want to encourage self-service, you have to make it easy and straightforward, or else customers aren't going to be able to use it. So customized portals, we have definitely utilized some customization in our self-service customer portals. And that leads into number 6, customer self-service. As much as possible, push into your customers' hands. We did have some pushback internally where people thought, well, maybe customers don't want to do this. Maybe they want Gemalto to do it for them. Of course, that option is still available. They could always pick up the phone. They can always call us, and we can perform the functions that are available in the portal for them. But more and more, we're hearing customers say, put the power in my hands. Let me do it. Give me the ability to do it and make it easy for me to do it myself so I don't have to wait. Number 7, actionable insights. This is around mining the data that's available via those self-service portals and making good use of it. And then regular engagement. Being in touch with customers in the right frequency, delivering notifications for expiries or product updates, just staying in touch with them. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the last slide that I'm going to cover before handing it off. So in summary, if I were to say, how to transform your business, and coming from someone who's going through it right now and based on lessons we've learned, the first point is probably the very most important, is ensure that you have internal alignment. Make sure that there's an executive, at least one executive, if not the entire executive team, who's sponsoring this transition. And then find an internal owner. That internal owner primarily is me, with the creation of this role. Just the fact that a role was created to undertake the challenge of the transition in itself is a statement that that our management team saw the need and is backing the transition. So that was really important to be able to get things moving and get people behind the effort. A customer-first approach, always keeping the customer experience in mind, not just focusing on internal efficiencies, but also improving the customer experience, giving them as much self-service capability as possible, and making it easy for them to order, and then be an ongoing customer. And then finally, buy, don't build. If we had tried to build all the functionality that we needed ourselves, I wouldn't be talking to you today because we wouldn't have made very much progress at all. We definitely looked at tools that were available and expertise that existed in order to make the progress that we've made. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Manoj, who's going to share some information and I believe a tool that's available to help you with that buy versus build analysis.
Thanks, Vickie. Marcy, next slide, please. All right. So again, I play the role of a principal solutions architect, working with our customers. When I look at my customers, I see two kinds of requests coming to us. One is customers who are primarily new to this business and want to monetize their software, so they need a monetization solution. And the second set of customers who probably have a homegrown system that has reached its limits and capability, and they just cannot innovate anymore on their existing homegrown offers, and they're coming to us for a transformation. So when I look at and I've just like Dave and Vickie, we all have lots of experience in this entitlements area. But I look at the history of entitlements, right? It was traditionally mostly a fragmented homegrown story. And one of the reasons for that was there's no real flexible commercial off-the-shelf product that could be tweaked to meet the new business models, needs of your organizations, your acquisition integration needs, and things like that, right? But that story is changing very rapidly now, and there are very viable commercial off-the-shelf products there right now. And true build buy decisions are happening in every company right now as they move to this transition. So we are seeing that a lot with our customer base, and some of the questions that our customers are asking themselves while they consider this are the following, right? I mean, when you choose to build or buy, these are the first questions you need to ask, right? First, is your solution scalable, right? Does it scale with increased users, right? Does it perform with massive scale when you have things like IoT use cases? Are you able to pin your users to the closest data center? Are you providing a geographical point of presence to them? Things like that, right? Just scale in terms of performance of your systems. The second consideration is business models. How are you addressing rollout of new business models? I'm sure your product leaders are all looking at things like consumption economics or B4B and finding all these new innovative business models that our customers are asking for. And they're probably coming to you folks in operations and saying, hey, can you roll out this business model for us? So cloud usage, things like that, right? And does your systems allow an easy rollout of those business models? Or in the worst case, are your operations teams being seen as a bottleneck to your company's monetization innovations? The other things that your product leaders could ask is, can I offer try and buy capabilities or freemiums, right? So that's the second big factor. Now moving to the third one is, do you have in-house expertise in this, right? Again, especially for hardware companies, what we found is there's very little in-house expertise of how to do software. Deep domain knowledge of this space is required to make the right informed decisions. The fourth point, monetization and kind of learning all that stuff. Are you moving your brilliant technical talent away from the core focus of improving your product and creating distance in your product features from the competition? Are you redirecting them to doing software monetization activities? I think the more fundamental question is software monetization operations, is that a core or contextual operation in your organization? For most of our customers, they believe it's important, but it's not core to their organization. It's contextual, and they believe that they can buy it. And last but not least, are you at risk of your competition having a better software monetization offering available, right? Are you keeping pace with them? Or in the worst case, is your solution inferior to them, right? And if you're in some cases, you might be the first in your industry to break software monetization to a hardware focused industry. So in that case, are you making the right first impression with your customers? Because you get only one chance to make that impression, and you want to make a good one. So over the last 4 years, Gemalto has really brought to market a state-of-the-art entitlement management system, right? It's one of the best commercial off-the-shelf products out there, and it gives you a viable decision now to whether to build or buy. So one of the advantages of being late to the market, right? As I said, it was a highly fragmented, homegrown market earlier. One of the advantages of being late to the market is you basically get to leapfrog away from all the technical debt, and you get aligned straight away to the latest technologies that's out there. So our solution is actually a cloud-based solution. So we don't have any of the legacy hosted models that a lot of our customers used to have. And we can basically start to take advantage of the elastic cloud architectures. So what we'll do as part of this presentation is we'll provide you a calculator, a build by calculator that will actually help you determine the true cost of building or buying a software monetization solution. We'll offer this calculator free to all participants if you sign up for a follow-on one-on-one session with Gemalto. So the advantage of this calculator is, even in case you're deciding to build, right, this calculator helps you consider all aspects of not only the initial development, but also ongoing development and maintenance. In case you've decided to buy, this calculator will help you basically justify the cost of buying and using the output of this calculator to gain acceptance internally within your organization. So with that, I'd like to now pass it on to Dave DiMillo, who would summarize the session and bring us home.
Sorry, I don't know where Dave, maybe he's on mute and he's talking away.
Is that better?
Yes.
Sorry, it's exactly what it was, Marcy.
in.
I know, I'm sorry, you're always ahead of me. Thank you. I just want to touch on the build versus buy calculator for a second. As Manoj said, we use it pretty commonly with some of our customers when you start thinking about monetizing your entitlement system and so forth. There's this tendency to want to build because just software, right? But when we actually get in and you start looking at, well, you know, you need a web interface. Oh, well, you need to think about maybe collecting usage in the future, and you start looking at all the functions that you really need, not only today, but in the future. That stuff really starts adding up. So it's an interesting exercise. It's a little eye-opening, and I encourage anyone who really is thinking about doing it, or if you need to run the exercise just to justify why you're dead set on buying, that's also a good thing to have, because eventually somebody is going to ask you the question, right? If you go to your CFO and say, we want to buy the solution, this is what it costs, somebody may say, why don't we want to build? At least you'll have a concrete answer. So highly encourage that. And on this last chart here, just 4 points. Obviously, start with a plan. Vickie noted a couple things that are really important. One is executive ownership. And if your company isn't fully committed to this type of digital transformation, generally you're going to be spinning your wheels for a little bit, and even having an owner on the execution side. So we found ourselves in that same gap. I was working internally with our operations team, a few years ago, and nobody really owned the problem. We had some executive sponsorship, but nobody really owned the execution of the problem. And as Vickie mentioned, it was just a couple years ago where they decided, hey, we really need to make this work for us. We have to have somebody committed to it. We have to make it our job. And we've gotten so much more traction since we put somebody in the position of executive ownership and execution ownership, and that started with a plan. So I can't underscore that point enough. One thing that tends to happen when we start working with our customers, especially if you approach this project as an IT project, you can tend to lose sight of your customers, right? And tend to lose sight of your customer experience. And that is, what we try to do is when we engage is kind of start from the customer and work inward, rather than starting from a system and working outward. And hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So if you work inward from the customer, you start by asking, okay, my customer buys something. What do I want to have happen, right? What do you want their experience to be? They get an email, they click on the email, and the lights turn on somehow, right? So that's starting from the customer working inward, rather than saying, okay, we're gonna have an order, goes through the system that, we're gonna set up this work order, then this has to flow to this system. And if you approach it from that perspective, you could find yourself having a very kind of mechanical user experience that's not all that sweet. So don't lose sight of your customers. We're here for best practices. This is what we do on the overall digital transformation, right? If you're talking about supply chain digital transformation, there are certainly some companies out there who specialize in consulting for digital supply chain. So don't hesitate to use those types of customers, and then certainly focus on your core business. We talked about build versus buying competitively. The notion or the desire to build an SM solution is really our biggest competitor, because again, sometimes you think it's just software and it's not that hard until you actually get in there and do it. But the larger deals that we're in are the ones where a customer has built multiple times and realized it's not really worth it. They want to focus on their core business. They want to hand off some of this type of work to a company that specializes in it, so they can get back to work themselves. So that's really it. I think, Marcy, at this point, we're going to address questions if there were any in the
yes, right. That's correct, Dave. We're going to talk about some of the questions, and I have a few things. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. I have a few things that I want to talk about at the very end. So let me address, since we kind of just finished up with the build versus buy calculator. I have a question regarding what type of information is needed to run the calculator, or what do they need to prepare for in advance to be able to run the calculator? What kind of data?
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. So it's pretty straightforward, right? It builds from as simple as how many different license generators do I have? Do I have prior expertise building this? Do I sell through channel or do I sell direct? On the enforcement side, there are questions on, do I need to have just a simple enforcement technology? Do I need to have metered licenses? Do I need to have expiring licenses? Things like that. And it just adds a little more complexity to the calculator as you input these features, these different capabilities, and what comes out of that is a cost element, right? You also have a factor in the calculator which basically says, okay, what's the billing rate of your developers, right? If you have a largely US-based team, right, what's your hourly cost or things like that. So you can tweak it based on your parameters and then come up with a number. But what it also does is it not only just talks about the initial build phase, but it also forces you to basically think about what does it take in terms of staff and infrastructure to maintain it. So there are data entry points in terms of what's the cost of maintaining it in terms of headcount as well as infrastructure. So it's a fairly holistic view of a true cost of ownership and running a entitlement management system. And it'll help you really ascertain that, because you don't want to go to your project sponsors and say, I need so many X number of dollars, and then go back 4 quarters after rollout and say, I completely forgot about, I need to run this thing as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Good point. So I guess as a follow-up to that, it really is a standalone tool. It's a sort of engine plus a spreadsheet that will deliver to the people who are interested. They can also plug their own numbers and run a workshop with our professional services team.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's another question. I think it's for Vickie. It sounds like a Vickie question. Which of the 5 software go-to-market life cycles have presented you with the most challenges, and can you explain why?
Yeah, hi, Marcy. I would say the last 2, the maintain and renew. And the reason I would say that is because there was a lot of focus, as I mentioned, on transitioning our offerings or starting with new product introductions on how do we build it, how are we going to sell it, how are we going to fulfill it. Those were the most immediate focus areas because they were needed nearest in time. Once we got some momentum with that, then there's kind of this temptation to lose focus or disband the team and say, great, we've got that in production, let's move on to the next thing. But really those last 2 phases, the maintain and renew, require focus as well, because as we always say, it's easier to keep an existing customer than to get a new one. So making sure that we have things set up in the maintain stage such that we're staying in that right level of communication with the customer, and that we're collecting data. We're looking at the data that we're getting from those initial sales after we've gone through the fulfill stage, continuing to look at, okay, who's buying, how are they using it, which features are they using, and making good use of that data has been a little bit more challenging. Not because it's challenging to do, but because there's a temptation to move on to the next thing and not really fully leverage the information that we have and what we've already launched.
That's an interesting point, because you said it's easier to get a new customer. Easier to keep a customer than get a new customer. It's also less expensive, right?
Right, exactly. So just just avoiding the temptation to put all the focus on the first three and then kind of ignore the last two. That's been a little bit challenging internally, but we're fighting to keep the focus all the way through the fourth and the fifth stages of the cycle.
Great, thank you, Vickie. And Dave, here's a question for you. We understand that this is a process within Gemalto, but can you give us a real company example where you're working through this process with them?
Sure. Off the top of my head here, the one that comes to mind, and I think I can talk about a little more freely because they've done webinars for us as well, as Juniper Networks out in California. Classic hardware company. And once we started to engage with Juniper, first of all, they chose us as the replacement of their software monetization solution, but traditional hardware company, they not only ship boxes, but they think in terms of boxes, right? Everything is serialized from the licenses to even support. And so the software monetization piece was a piece of a larger transformation project, right? Which had an owner, it was funded, it had executive approval and insight and so forth. So some of the big things there are, for Juniper, and they talked quite openly about this in one of the webinars, and I'm pretty sure we have this on available for anybody who wants to listen to it. They talked about the shift in mindset of the company from a hardware mindset to a software mindset, and they actually realized psychologically for some of their longtime employees that this was a big change for them. It was a big change mentally for them, and they actually embraced that and had some sessions working with employees to really get them over that hurdle of grabbing so tightly to the thing they know and love, which is hardware. But that's a really good example of a company that's really that understands that their products have to get more virtualized, their offerings have to get more software oriented, and they chose us as the platform to do that over our competitors.
It's great, Dave. I also want to mention that if you want to look at watch that video specifically from Juniper, you could go to licensinglive.com and you could see their session from last year. They're also going to be speaking this year at our Licensing Live event in Cupertino, California, on October 24th through the 26th. I'll also send that information to you after the webinar with the booking, form for you to set up a one-on-one session for the build versus buy calculator. And as soon as we have the white paper completely done, we'll send each one of you a new white paper that we're publishing on the critical role of the user experience in software monetization. So I think we're going to be able to give you back a few minutes of your day. I thank you all very much for attending, especially thank the speakers. I think this was a great session and I appreciate being a part of it. So everyone have a great day and thank you.